27 people, gone in about 3 minutes, one neighborhood. That is the story of Jarrell, Texas, and it stands as one of the most violent tornado events in Texas history. Most tornadoes tear through a town and move on. Seconds. This one crawled, 5 miles an hour, slower than you jog. And that slowness is exactly what turned it into a monster. Think about that for a second. A storm so lazy it barely moved, sitting over homes like it had all the time in the world. Why does that matter? Because a fast tornado hits you and leaves. A slow one grinds. It stays. It works. On May 27, 1997, one subdivision in central Texas learned that difference, and 40 homes shrank to bare concrete and mud. Not damaged. Erased. How does that even happen? That is what I want to walk you through, because the answer is stranger and darker than most people know. So what set this thing loose? Two boundaries. A cold front pushing down from the north and an outflow boundary sliding toward the southwest slammed together right over central Texas. And the air above them sat loaded. Meteorologists clocked the atmospheric energy that afternoon at 6,000 joules per kilogram. If that number means nothing to you, here is the short version. It is the fuel gauge for storms, and 6,000 is off the charts. A sky primed to detonate. Most severe weather days never come close. This one blew past extreme and kept climbing. The ingredients all lined up, hovering over farmland and quiet streets, and nobody watching the radar that morning could have guessed what those readings would build by mid-afternoon. Unstable air. A collision of fronts. The recipe for something the record books had never quite seen. 3:40 in the afternoon. That is when it started. And it did not look like much. A thin, rope-like column of dust twisting up north of the town of Jarrell. Almost delicate. The kind of thing a farmer might squint at and figure would pass. It did not pass. In under 2 minutes, that skinny rope ballooned into a wedge 3/4 of a mile wide. Look at that timeline. Under 2 minutes. One moment a dust column, the next a wall of black that swallowed the horizon. And this froze the blood of everyone who understood weather. It headed the wrong way. Texas tornadoes move northeast. Every forecaster knows that in their bones. This one tracked south-southwest, straight against the grain, aimed right at Double Creek Estates. Backwards. A storm breaking every rule it was supposed to follow, growing faster than anyone could react. Now here is where the true horror lives. It stopped. Not frozen, solid, but close. The tornado slowed to a crawl and parked itself over Double Creek Estates for roughly 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Say that out loud and it sounds like nothing. Inside a tornado, it is an eternity. A normal twister gives a house one violent shove and rolls on. This one leaned in and refused to leave. It spun over the same neighborhood again and again and again. Every pass took more. First, the roofs, then the walls, then the frames, then the foundations themselves. 38 homes stood in that subdivision when the sky went dark. When it cleared, every single one had been leveled to the slab. Not flattened. Not in pieces you could photograph. Swept clean. How do you even process that? But the houses were only the start. The real signature of Jarrell, the thing that still stuns scientists decades later, is what it did to the ground. The dirt. The winds peeled up to 18 inches of topsoil clean off the fields, carving deep mud trenches where solid earth used to be. 18 inches of soil. Gone. Think about the force that takes. Then look at the roads. Over 525 feet of asphalt road surface ripped away from the county roads like skin off an orange. The fields nearby held livestock too. More than 300 head of cattle lost in the open. This storm did more than knock things down. It erased them completely, right down to the layer beneath your feet. Nothing about it obeyed the normal script of what a tornado is supposed to be able to do. And that sparked a fight scientists are still having. Because the destruction ran so total, so far past anything on record, some people could not accept the numbers. In 1998, a report from the National Institute of Standards and Technology argued something wild. They claimed the damage might only prove F3 level winds, not F5, arguing that structural flaws and weak foundation anchoring caused the homes to fail at lower wind speeds. Extra time, not extra speed. Meteorologists tore that apart. Their answer was simple. F3 winds do not produce the severe ground scouring and asphalt removal seen in Jarrell. F3 winds cannot scour 1.5 feet of soil from a field. It does not matter how long they blow. The energy just is not there. The consensus held. This was an F5, the top of the old scale, one of the most violent examples ever documented. When experts argue this hard over a single storm, you know you are staring at something that broke the mold. But strip away the numbers for a minute, because Jarrell was never really about wind speeds. It was about the people on those 40 acres. The Igo family. All 5 of them. Joan Igo taught at the local elementary school, and she was home that afternoon with her twin boys. Their house stood in Double Creek Estates. When the storm passed, the entire family was lost. The home swept from its foundation with them inside. 5 members of one family, taken in a single afternoon. How does a town come back from that? Jarrell answered the only way it could. Years later, when the community built a new elementary school, they named it Igo Elementary. Kids walk through those doors every morning now, saying a name most will never know the full weight of. That is how a town refuses to forget. It carves the memory into the future. Then there is the story that haunts me most. The Moharing family lived in a sturdy frame home, the kind you would trust in a storm. Their neighbors, the Ruiz family, lived in a mobile home, the kind you were always warned about. So when the sky turned, the Moharings did the decent thing. The kind thing. The 2 Ruiz brothers ran over to the solid frame home to seek shelter. Think about that choice. Neighbors opening their door to protect neighbors. And here sits the cruelty of this storm. The strong frame home was wiped away, killing everyone sheltering inside. The empty mobile home next door? It survived. Minor damage. Standing. The safe choice became the fatal one, and the risky one was spared by nothing but chance. There is no lesson in that, no neat moral, just the brutal randomness of where this thing chose to plant its feet. And then there is John Reyes. He huddled under a bed with 2 people he loved, his grandmother, Emma Mullins, and his 5-year-old cousin, Ryan. A mattress over their heads, arms wrapped tight, doing everything right. The winds ripped the mattress away like paper. Little Ryan was thrown 500 feet and did not survive. Emma was pulled into the storm and killed by flying debris. 2 of the 3, in seconds. John lived. The only one. Imagine carrying that. Imagine being the survivor of a moment that took a child and a grandmother from the same small space you shared. These are not statistics on a weather report. This is a 5-year-old and his grandmother and a young man who wakes every day knowing exactly how thin the line was. Every one of the people lost in Double Creek Estates had a story like this. For the ones who lived, the aftermath was its own kind of shock. LaDonna Peterson came back to where her house had stood and found nothing to come back to. And what stuck with her was not the big picture. It was the small, human, gut-level detail. She realized she did not have a toothbrush, no clean clothes for her child. Everything a family owns, every ordinary object you never think about until it vanishes, taken in one afternoon. That is the part the damage photos never show you. A tornado takes far more than homes. It takes the toothbrush, the spare shirt, the 1,000 tiny things that make a day feel normal. Survivors were not simply rebuilding houses. They were rebuilding the whole texture of ordinary life from absolute zero, with the sky's fingerprints still fresh on the empty ground where their street used to run. One image from that day sticks to people and never lets go. A worker at Jarrell Farm Supply named Scott Beckwith grabbed his camera as the wedge bore down and fired off a sequence of shots. In one of them, multiple sub-vortices became visible within the main circulation. Together, in the frame, those dark twisting shapes look almost exactly like a giant figure walking across the land. People started calling it dead man walking. Look at it once and you understand why. The storm, mid-stride, striding toward the town like it had a purpose. A photograph that turned raw meteorology into something that looks alive. Almost deliberate. It became one of the most recognized tornado photos ever captured, and it put a face, a terrible walking face, on a disaster that otherwise defies imagination. What makes it all even harder to grasp? This storm did not rage for hours. From touchdown to the moment it lifted, the Jarrell tornado lived just 13 minutes. It covered 5.1 miles of ground. That is it. 13 minutes and about 5 miles, and yet it produced some of the most intense wind damage anyone in Texas has ever recorded. Compare that to storms that stay down for an hour and carve 50-mile scars across 3 states. Those are terrifying too, but they spread their power out. Jarrell did the opposite. It concentrated everything, all that energy, into one slow, grinding crawl over one small neighborhood. Short, slow, small, and more destructive per foot than nearly anything on record. The lesson buried here is not about how big a tornado gets. It is about how long it decides to stay. So where does Jarrell sit in the bigger story of these storms? Right at the farthest edge, and it stayed relevant in a way nobody wanted. For years, meteorologists watched the top of the scale go silent. After the Moore, Oklahoma tornado in 2013, the United States went 12 straight years without a single confirmed EF5, the highest rating on the modern scale. 12 years, a drought at the very top. Then, in October 2025, the National Weather Service upgraded a tornado that struck Enderlin, North Dakota, back in June of that year, finally breaking the streak. And every time these giants return to the conversation, Jarrell rides back in with them. The benchmark. The high watermark for what wind can do when everything lines up wrong. Nearly 30 years on, forecasters still point to that Central Texas afternoon to explain how far off the scale a storm can climb. But the last word does not belong to the science. It belongs to Jarrell. In May of 2025, the town gathered again, 28 years after that afternoon, at the Jarrell Tornado Memorial Park on County Road 305. They read the names, all 27. And that is the part that outlasts the wind speeds, the debates, and the famous photograph. A town that watched a slow-moving storm wipe out 38 homes, take 5 members of one family, throw vehicles half a mile, and strip the earth down to raw mud, still stands, still gathers, still says the names aloud. The tornado slowed to 5 miles an hour over Double Creek Estates and acted like it had all the time in the world. It did not. It lasted 13 minutes. The people it tried to erase have lasted almost 3 decades and counting. That is the real story of Jarrell. The storm was one of the most violent tornadoes this country has ever seen, and the town outlived it.